Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. It's no secret that most tie-in games tend to be pretty average at best, but every now and then you'll get something that seems to at least, according to its fans, stand out above the rest. One of those few shining examples seems to be Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. Developed by Traveller's Tales and published by Activision and Disney Interactive in late 1999, going on to receive somewhat okay scores from critics, Toy Story 2 seems to be one of those games where I feel the fan base enjoyed it a lot more than the critics did at the time. Though, in saying that, I think it does come down to what platform you played it on. As for me, I played the PS5 port of the original PS1 version, but it is worth noting that there are several versions, including a Dreamcast, Mac, N64, Game Boy Color, and PC version, so your experience may vary. Going on to sell over an estimated 2.5 million copies across these platforms, Toy Story 2 was definitely a massive success, especially for a lot of tie-in games at the time. Though, not anything revolutionary, what it did as a 3D collectathon action platformer, it did fairly well. Sure, not to the standards of something like Banjo-Kazooie or Spyro, but it was definitely above average for the millions of other games that were coming out at the time. Consisting of 15 different levels, the game will loosely follow the events of the movie. However, it is important to note that the developers did require a fair bit of creative license in order to turn this into an actual game, more so than just being a one-to-one retelling of the mega successful movie that it's based on. And for what it's worth, nothing here feels too out of place, as you will explore the surprisingly expansive levels in your quest to collect enough Pizza Planet tokens in order to progress. From Andy's house to Al's toy barn and even a battle against Emperor Zurg, everywhere you would expect to visit in the game, you will. Just as a quick aside, who else wanted that Zurg game that Rex was playing in the movie? Because I always wanted that to be a fully fleshed out game growing up. As mentioned, being a 3D platformer, the player will find themselves playing as Buzz Lightyear, starting off as you would expect in Andy's room. And Toy Story 2 is surprisingly more hands-off than I remember, although not lacking in tutorial messages and hints, as you will constantly be yelled at by other characters for them to tell you what to do. The game itself expects you to do what most of us would have done at the time, and that's read those forgotten tomes of a bygone era, the manual. God, I miss manuals. The reason I say this is because you're pretty much thrown straight into the deep end. You'll notice as soon as you boot in, you are just standing there, and enemies are moving around in front of you. You have no idea what's going on, no idea what you need to do, other than you're here, figure it out. Which, given how overbearing tutorials will come in the future, it's actually kind of refreshing to go back and play this. Mechanically, the game is relatively simple, though it does have some complexities to it, but nothing that is going to be mind-breaking or impossible for you to figure out. Firstly, the movement. Although relatively fluid, it can take a second to get used to. At least it did for me, but this could also be the fact I haven't played the game in over 20 years. I'm really old. Beyond just walking around in 360 degrees of motion, Buzz has the ability to jump, double jump, grab and climb, shoot his laser, do a spin attack, and even do a ground pound. Now there is more to the game overall, but these are the main things you're going to find yourself doing. And although the game does have its fair share of combat, for the most part you are going to be trying to solve puzzles and traverse the world. So jumping and butt slams are going to be your best friend. Although it does take a little bit of getting used to when it comes to judging the depth of a certain jump, thanks to the game's really tight controls, you will figure it out pretty quick, making the game's traversal actually a lot more fun than you would expect. Granted, you can drop quite a distance, and it can be very frustrating if you haven't unlocked the shortcuts, in which shout out to whoever thought of the shortcuts. You're a genius, and I love you. But overall, you're not really going to struggle when it comes to the game's traversal. The biggest challenge you're going to face when it comes to the traversal, outside of enemies being in the way, is actually typically the game's camera, which, although quite functional and pretty impressive for a PS1 game, is something you might want to set to the manual mode more so than the auto mode, as I found myself having to constantly go into the first person aiming mode for shooting in order to realign it, because it just didn't want to line up the way I wanted it to, which is where the platforming can get a little bit difficult. This is, as mentioned, due to the fact you can fall quite a large distance upon failing a jump, and this is due to the game's incredible verticality. This use of more vertical platforming really adds to the stakes and challenge of Toy Story 2 in a way that feels really natural, since we are playing as toys that are relatively small. It would only make sense that everyday objects and locations that we would take for granted seem almost insurmountable for Buzz Lightyear. It helps the game become more engaging while also capturing the spirit of what Toy Story is in a way that's shown and not told, adding to that overall hands-off approach that this game seems to have. Another layer adding to the challenge of this game is its collectathon elements. From gold coins, planet tokens, and power-ups, Buzz will find himself running around like a madman trying to collect everything he needs in order to progress the game, which on paper is pretty simple. However, due to the game's verticality, as mentioned before, it can be pretty hard due to the fact they can be in hard to reach places or placed quite vicariously, and this might require you to figure out some optimal pathing or just get lucky. Sometimes Sometimes items will be hidden behind puzzles, but most if not all of the game's puzzles are relatively simple and won't require a lot of effort to figure out. In an interesting move, Toy Story 2's boss battles actually play more like a puzzle than the actual in-game puzzles, as they can take a little bit of patience and time to figure out, making them a lot more engaging, more so than just a shoot and win, which is a great decision as it makes use of more of the in-game mechanics, making each of these bosses feel rather unique, more so than just a copy-paste job. Sure, a lot of them do end up functionally going down the same way as pretty much most bosses in any game would. However, I think this adds to the overall depth of the combat which this game sorely needs, due to the fact it is quite limited. It's not a bad combat system, but it is definitely not a great combat system. So if the combat system isn't the biggest selling point, why do people rant and rave about this game? Well, solely its presentation. It is second to none. And I know I say that a lot about a lot of PS1 games, but I think a lot of them look absolutely incredible, and especially in a way that we don't really appreciate at the time. Sure, we appreciated good graphics, but we didn't really appreciate really well done coloring. Now, if I do have to critique this game, its faces, are a thing. But for the most part, everything looks and feels as it should. The game's soundtrack is incredible, very catchy, and one of those things you might want to put on just to listen to in the background. Especially the main menu theme, considering it is just You've Got a Friend in Me by Randy Newman, just the backing track. It's wonderful to hear it, and I can't get enough of it. You also get pretty much the entire original voice cast. Granted, not absolutely everybody, and as something that made me chuckle, you get Jim Hanks instead of Tom Hanks playing Woody, which is what actually separates Disney from pretty much everyone else back in the day when it came to their tie-in games. They would typically get most of the original voice crew in order to make everything sound and feel right, which was a great treat, especially for kids. It's part of the reason why I think these games age so well. And it's not to say other tie-in games don't, but I mean, let's be honest. Disney is king when it comes to nostalgia for a reason. Mickey, I said the line. Please put the gun down. Don't. You can't do that. I have a cat. No.